Have you ever felt like you're constantly playing a role in a movie, being the star, the director, and the audience all at once? You go through your day thinking, planning, remembering, judging, and reacting, and it all feels so personal, so you. But what if I told you that the person you believe yourself to be, the me inside your head, is not really there the way you think it is? Sounds impossible, right? Like something out of a philosophical sci-fi novel? But in reality, this illusion of self is one of the most persistent tricks the human mind plays. In fact, it's been silently running in the background your whole life. And now, modern neuroscience and ancient Buddhist wisdom are coming together to reveal something truly shocking. You are not who you think you are. So what exactly is this illusion? Is it dangerous? And what happens when we start to see through it? Get ready to dive deep into the hidden mechanics of your own mind, where thoughts seem to appear on their own, and the you behind them might not be what you expect. Let's explore together in today's video. You're doing something completely ordinary, folding laundry, waiting at a red light, or maybe brushing your teeth, and suddenly your mind drifts away. Out of nowhere, you're back in a memory from years ago, replaying a conversation, imagining an argument that hasn't even happened yet, or wondering what to eat for dinner tonight. You didn't try to think about any of these things. They just showed up, uninvited. This is something we all experience, but rarely question. Where did that thought come from? Who brought it here? Most of us have grown up believing that we are the ones thinking our thoughts, that we are the thinker, the doer, the mind behind the mind. But Buddhism offers a completely different view, a quiet revolution in understanding the nature of thought. It says, you're not the one thinking these thoughts. In fact, there is no fixed you doing the thinking at all. Thoughts arise like clouds passing through an open sky, and just like clouds, they come and go without asking for your permission. You don't summon them, and yet, here they are. This is not some mental malfunction or failure. It's the default state of the untrained, unexamined mind. Left on its own, the mind behaves like a restless animal, always searching, always reacting, never settling. It jumps from one moment to the next, following impulses, memories, and sensations. Anything that catches its attention. The process happens so quickly that we don't even realize we're not in control. And here's where the teaching begins to gently shake our assumptions. If you are not consciously creating each thought, then can you really say they belong to you? Are they yours? Or just events that pass through your awareness, like passing sounds or drifting? Buddhist psychology doesn't ask us to reject the mind. It simply invites us to observe it with greater clarity. And once we do, something surprising happens. We begin to see that thoughts are not personal. They are not even all that unique. They are conditions arising from causes, shaped by memory, mood, habit, and moment. This changes everything. Because if there is no solid thinker behind the thought, then maybe, just maybe, the self we keep trying to protect, improve, or fix was never quite as real as we believed. So if thoughts seem to come and go without your control, what causes them to arise in the first place? Why do some thoughts appear when you're tired or anxious or after hearing a certain song? Buddhism points us to a core insight that unlocks this mystery. The principle of dependent origination, in Pali, paticca samuppada. This ancient teaching reveals something quietly profound. Nothing in your experience exists independently. Every thought, every emotion, every sensation arises because of specific conditions coming together, like ingredients in a recipe. Thoughts don't just appear randomly. And they don't appear because you told them to. They are triggered, sparked by causes, both internal and external, most of which operate beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Let's take a simple example. You're walking down the street and smell fresh bread. Without effort, your mind recalls the bakery near your childhood home. That memory leads to a sense of nostalgia, which then stirs a thought about calling your mother, which quickly turns into worry about her health. None of this was planned. One condition led to another, like dominoes falling in a chain reaction. That's dependent origination in motion. Thought is not something we create out of thin air. It's a result, an effect, born out of previous causes, including our environment, memories, habits, mood, and even subtle bodily sensations. The mind functions more like an echo chamber than a master command center. But here's the part that often surprises people. Because each thought arises based on conditions, it cannot truly be said to be yours. It doesn't belong to a solid self because that very self, if examined closely, also arises from conditions. There is no fixed I at the center, no eternal thinker pulling the strings. There's just the process, fluid, responsive, unfolding moment to moment. Now you might be thinking, but I can choose to think something, right? That's where it gets subtle. Even the act of choosing arises from causes. Your decision to reflect on a memory, to plan a conversation, to analyze a feeling, it's all built on prior experience, mental conditioning, and present triggers. Even your ability to intend is part of the chain. There is a simple experiment you can try. Close your eyes and try to predict your next thought. Really try. Sit in stillness and watch. What you'll likely discover is this. Nothing appears while you're waiting, but the moment you stop trying to control it, a thought arises. Why? Because the act of observing changes the mental conditions. It's like looking at your shadow in the mirror. The more you chase it, the more it dances away. This isn't just abstract theory. It's a gateway to freedom. The Buddha didn't teach dependent origination to confuse people. He taught it to dissolve the illusion that we are stuck, that we are our thoughts, that we are somehow defective because our minds wander. When we see the conditional nature of thoughts, we stop clinging to them. We stop judging them. We begin to let them come and go, like waves rising and falling on the ocean. And maybe for the first time, we start to feel the spaciousness of the mind that doesn't need to grab on to anything. That's where stillness begins. Not by silencing thoughts, but by seeing them clearly. We live most of our lives with a quiet assumption. I am the one thinking. I am the one choosing. I am the one behind all of this. That sense of being a central, unchanging self feels so real, so familiar, that we rarely question it. But what if that very sense of I is not what it seems? What if it's not permanent, not solid, not even truly you? This is where Buddhism offers one of its most powerful and for some unsettling teachings. Anatta, the doctrine of non-self. It doesn't mean that you don't exist at all. It means that what you take to be a stable, unchanging identity is actually a collection of changing experiences, thoughts, emotions, sensations, linked together in a pattern so familiar you mistake it for a single you. Let's bring this down to everyday experience. Imagine you're sitting alone, and a wave of anxiety arises. You think, I'm anxious. But pause for a moment. What really happened? A physical sensation arose, maybe tightness in the chest, a clenching in the gut. Then came a thought, something is wrong. Then came the identification, I am anxious. But all of that, sensation, thought, emotion, occurred in sequence, where in that chain is a fixed, unchanging I. The truth is, the I is not the one creating these events. It's part of the story built from them. It's like mistaking a river for a solid object, when in reality it's just water moving through space. Just as a river is a process, not a thing, so too is the self a stream of processes, interconnected, ever-shifting, never still. This is exactly what the Buddha saw under the Bodhi tree. As he sat in deep meditation, he watched thoughts arise and pass, emotions shift and fade, memories return and dissolve. But he did not find a thinker behind the thoughts. He found patterns, movements, reactions, but no single solid self that was orchestrating it all. In Buddhist texts, this patterning is often described as the monkey mind, constantly jumping from one branch to another, grabbing for the next thought, avoiding discomfort, chasing pleasure. It's restless, reactive, and always narrating. But here's the key. Just because there's a voice in your head doesn't mean there's someone behind it pulling the strings. Think about it. Have you ever tried to stop thinking a thought and instead made it louder? That's because you're not commanding your thoughts, you're experiencing them. The mind is like an echo chamber where impressions from the past collide with present stimuli and create momentary reactions. And those reactions build a sense of continuity we call. But look deeper, and you'll find what's truly astonishing. There is no single thought that you can call permanent. None of them last. They appear, disappear, and are replaced. So, if the building blocks of you are always changing, what remains? This is not just an abstract question. It's a doorway. When we stop identifying with every thought and emotion, we begin to taste something rare: freedom. We no longer feel the need to defend every reaction or justify every belief. We begin to rest in a space where life continues, but the story of me becomes more transparent, less sticky, less painful. The idea of non-self doesn't take away your humanity. In fact, it restores it. It reminds you that you're not trapped in an old version of yourself. You're not the sum total of your fears or achievements. You are awareness in motion, capable of evolving, growing, letting go. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, "I'm such a mess," or "This is just who I am," pause. Ask yourself, who is the I in this sentence? Look not for a fixed answer, but for the space between the thoughts. That space is the beginning of liberation. Imagine sitting beside a river. You watch the water flow. It never stops, never pauses. You couldn't step into the same stream twice, even if you tried. The water is always moving, always new. Now imagine that river is your consciousness, your thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations. They're the flowing water, but most of us, without even realizing it, treat our minds like a stone. Solid, fixed, and we say things like, "This is just who I am," or "I've always been this way." But Buddhism gently reminds us that is an illusion. The mind, like the river, is in constant motion. There is nothing static about your experience, even though it often feels like there is. You are not a thing. You are a process. And the moment we begin to see that, we shift from being caught in the flow to becoming an aware observer of the stream. This doesn't mean we become passive. It means we start to notice the cause and effect nature of the mind. One thought leads to another. A single memory triggers an emotion, which stirs up a reaction, which gives rise to more thoughts. And suddenly, we're deep into a narrative, often without even noticing we began. This is how we live much of our lives, swept along by mental currents we didn't choose, caught in a cascade that feels personal but is actually mechanical. Let's take a common example. You remember a mistake you made at work. That memory leads to a feeling of regret, which sparks a judgmental thought like, why do I always mess things up? That thought brings up past failures, which create shame, anxiety, or even anger. And before you know it, your entire mood has shifted. All from one passing memory. It's a mental domino effect. But if you could pause and see each step in that chain, the illusion would begin to dissolve. You'd see it's not you messing up. It's a pattern playing out. Conditions giving rise to more conditions. This is the teaching of cause and effect, or in Buddhist terms, kamma, karma, and paticca, samuppada, dependent origination. Not in the mystical sense, but in a deeply psychological one. Everything in your inner world is conditioned. Your habits of mind were formed over time by repetition, experience, and response. The good news? What is conditioned can be changed. What flows can be redirected. The river doesn't have to keep running in the same direction forever. However, this change doesn't come from force. Trying to control your thoughts, to stop them or fix them, is like trying to dam a river with your bare hands. It only makes the current stronger, more turbulent. The harder you resist, the more the river pushes back. So instead of resistance, Buddhism teaches us to turn to awareness. We don't try to stop the water. We learn how to float. We learn how to watch the current without getting swept away. And in that watching, something remarkable happens. Space opens up. A breath of stillness enters. The grip of the mind begins to loosen. That spacious awareness is not something new you have to create. It's already here. It's the silent presence that sees the thoughts come and go. It's the part of you that notices the river without becoming the river. And as you rest more and more in that presence, the stories lose their power. The shame, the fear, the anger. They still arise, but they no longer define you. They're just weather patterns passing through the sky of awareness. In truth, you are not the river. You are not even the one steering the boat. You are the sky, vast, still, open, within which the river flows. And in that realization lies a profound peace. There is a simple but powerful truth that can quietly change your life. You are not your thoughts. But what does that really mean? If you're not your thoughts, then who or what are you? To answer that, we need to shift from thinking about the mind to actually observing it. Not fixing, not judging, not analyzing, just observing. It sounds almost too simple to matter, but in that simplicity lies the entire heart of Buddhist mindfulness practice. The Buddha spoke of this practice in the Satipatthana Sutta, a foundational teaching on mindfulness. He described a way of relating to experience that was both gentle and radically clear. You bring your awareness to what is happening right now without getting pulled into the story. When a thought arises, you don't follow it. You don't resist it. You simply see it. Ah, a thought is arising, and then you let it pass. This may seem small, even insignificant, but try it for yourself, right now. Take 10 seconds to just watch your thoughts. Don't try to control them. Don't try to make them meaningful. Just observe what arises. Maybe it's a plan, a memory, a random phrase. Maybe it's a worry. And then it passes. Another comes. Then that one passes too. What remains is not the thought. It's the awareness that sees them come and go. This awareness is not caught in the stream. It's the space in which the stream flows, and that space is you, or at least something much closer to what you truly are than the ever-shifting thoughts you normally identify with. Let's break this down even further. You are walking through your day and you suddenly think, I'm not good enough. That thought hits hard. Maybe it brings up a memory of failure or a moment you regret. Your body reacts. Tight chest, sinking stomach, emotion floods in, and before you know it, your whole mood has changed. But what if, instead of believing the thought, you simply recognized it as a mental event? You notice it arise. Here's a thought, I am not good enough. And then, instead of diving into it, you pause. You see the thought and you don't identify with it. You recognize this is just a pattern, a habitual loop, probably conditioned from years of comparison and criticism. It has appeared before, it will appear again. But it's not who you are. It's just a cloud passing through the sky. This shift from identification to observation creates space. It softens your grip on the mind's content. It invites a kind of freedom because you are no longer chained to every passing idea or emotional reaction. You're not a puppet of your inner dialogue. Modern neuroscience has begun to echo this ancient wisdom. Researchers like Dr. John Kabat-Zinn have shown that mindfulness, defined as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally, can physically change the brain. It reduces stress, increases focus, and literally rewires how we relate to thoughts and emotions. MRI scans show changes in areas related to fear, anxiety, and emotional regulation. In simple terms, observing your thoughts changes the way your mind functions. But the true power of mindfulness is not just in brain scans. It's in the experience of inner spaciousness. When you begin to observe rather than react, even the most painful thought loses its sting. You realize that you can hold it in awareness without collapsing into it. You begin to live from a deeper place, not caught in the storm, but resting in the quiet center. In Buddhism, this is not about becoming numb or indifferent. It's about relating to your experience with clarity, compassion, and curiosity. The thoughts still arise, but your relationship with them is transformed. You are not trying to destroy the mind. You are becoming its friend, a calm, steady, loving friend who can watch its movements without being fooled by them. And in that space of watching, of resting in awareness, a question begins to fade. The question that started it all. If I'm not my thoughts, who am I? Maybe you don't need an answer. Maybe you just need to watch the next thought rise and fall and smile, knowing that you are still here, clear, open, and free. There's a question many of us carry without ever speaking it aloud. Who's really in here? Who is at the center of all this thinking, feeling, and reacting? We walk through the world believing there's someone home inside our minds, someone who's calling the shots, someone solid behind the curtain. But have you ever stopped to truly look for that someone? Not just think about it, but actually look? The Buddha invited us to do just that. And not as a thought experiment or an intellectual puzzle, but as a living inquiry. He understood that much of our suffering comes from the unquestioned assumption that there's a fixed, permanent self driving the vehicle of life. But when we begin to examine this closely, honestly, gently, we may discover something completely unexpected. The house is empty. Try this for yourself. The next time a strong thought or emotion arises, ask quietly, who is experiencing this? Don't try to answer it with another thought. Instead, turn your attention inward and look, not with the mind, but with awareness itself. Look for the one who's thinking. Look for the one who's angry or scared or lonely. What do you find? Most people, when they sincerely look, find something surprising. They can't find a solid, unchanging I. They find thoughts, they find emotions, they find sensations, but no thinker, no feeler, no core identity, just patterns of experience arising and passing in awareness. It's like opening a tightly wrapped gift, only to find air. The wrapping was elaborate. Labels like me, mine, I am this way. But inside, there's nothing solid, nothing fixed. Not nothing in the sense of absence, but nothing you can hold on to. This insight is at the heart of the Buddha's teaching on anatta, or non-self. It doesn't mean you're a blank or a void. It means the self you think you are is not a permanent essence. It's more like a flame, real, visible, warm, but always changing shape, always moving, always dependent on conditions. To help people explore this, the Buddha spoke of the 5 aggregates: form, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These 5 make up our entire experience of being alive. But when we examine each one, body, sensation, perception, reaction, awareness, we find that none of them can truly be called self. They all change. They all depend on conditions. They all arise and pass away. In one ancient story, a monk named Kimaka spent years reflecting on these aggregates. He searched for a permanent self within them and found only movement. He realized even the thought, I am thinking, was just another conditioned event, a sankhara, not the sign of a central thinker, but a habit of identification. And when he saw this clearly, deeply, he was freed from the burden of selfhood, not erased, but released. We can feel this truth in our own lives if we slow down. Think of how your sense of self changes throughout a single day. In the morning, you're groggy and slow. Midday, focused and productive. At night, perhaps anxious or relaxed, depending on what's happening. Which one is the real you? The answer is none, or all, but none of them alone. The illusion is not that you don't exist. It's that you believe you exist as something separate and unchanging. And from that illusion, suffering begins. We fear losing what we call ourselves. We fight to preserve a version of identity. We cling to stories about who we are, who we should be, who we can never be. All of it builds the house of ego and keeps us locked inside. But what if there was another way? What if freedom came not from building a stronger sense of self, but from seeing through the illusion entirely, not as rejection or denial, but as clarity, a soft, honest realization. This idea of me is just another part of the flow. This realization doesn't strip you of identity. It gives you space to play with it, to be human and flawed and changing, and to be okay with that. You stop needing to be someone all the time. You rest, instead, in the vastness of being itself. So, who's really home? No one, and yet everything. Awareness is here, the breath is here, life is unfolding, and perhaps in this quiet seeing we realize we don't need a separate self to live. We only need presence. So, if the self we hold on to feels so convincing, where exactly is it hiding? This is the next question the Buddha invites us to ask, not to confuse us, but to liberate us. He taught that what we commonly call the self is, in fact, a bundle of processes working together. No part on its own is you, and yet, together, they give rise to what feels like a person, like a permanent me. These 5 processes are known as the 5 aggregates, Panca Kanda in Pali: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Let's take a slow, honest look at each one. 1. Form. Rupa. This is the body, the physical presence you experience through sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. It's easy to believe this is me, especially when we look in the mirror or feel pain. But the body is in constant change. Cells die and regenerate, hair grays, skin wrinkles. Illness and aging remind us that even this body isn't ours to fully control. It doesn't obey our will. It obeys conditions, genetics, environment, time. 2. Feeling Vedana. This refers to the raw quality of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. It's that flash of discomfort when something hurts, or the light warmth of joy when someone smiles at you. But feelings, too, are fleeting. What delights you today may bore you tomorrow. One moment of praise lifts your heart, one word of criticism crashes it down. If we were only our feelings, we would be constantly changing identities every hour. 3. Perception. Perception is how we recognize, label, and interpret what we experience. When you hear a voice and know it's your friend, or see red and know it means stop, that's perception. But perception is also shaped by memory, bias, culture. 2 people can witness the same event and come away with completely different interpretations. How can something so subjective and shifting be called a self? 4. Mental formations, sankhara. These are the intentions, habits, emotions, desires, and subconscious tendencies that drive our behavior. They are the stories we repeat, the reactions we default to, the karmic momentum we carry. Sankharas are complex, powerful, and often hidden, but like everything else, they arise and pass based on conditions. Even your deepest impulses can shift with enough awareness and training. They are not fixed, and so they are not you. 5. Consciousness, vijnana. This is the awareness that experiences everything, the stream of knowing that reflects sensations, thoughts, and emotions. But even consciousness is not constant. It arises and fades with each moment of contact. When you fall asleep, it disappears. When you wake up, it returns. The object changes, sound, sight, touch, and the consciousness associated with that object changes too. There is no singular, unchanging experiencer. Now, here's the key insight. Each of these 5 aggregates arises due to causes and conditions. Each one is impermanent. Each one is beyond your full control. The Buddha invites us to gently, honestly ask, can any of these truly be called me? Not as an idea, but as an observation. When a painful thought comes up, does it last? Does it remain yours forever? When your body aches, is the pain permanent? When you feel joy, does it stay with you indefinitely? No. Every part of our experience is like mist, real enough to feel, but impossible to hold. There's a beautiful story in the Buddhist texts about the monk Kamaka. He was a diligent practitioner who explored this very question. Though he had purified much of his mind, he still said, I don't see any of these aggregates as myself, but I still have the sense that there is a me somehow connected to them. Later, through deeper meditation, he realized even the sense of I am was just another mental formation, not a truth, but a construction. And when he saw that, the illusion fell away, like mist in the morning sun. That story shows us something important. This path is not about believing a doctrine of no self. It's about experiencing the truth of it directly, moment by moment, layer by layer. It's about looking so clearly that the illusion no longer sticks. When we do this, when we stop clinging to the aggregates as mine or me, a new kind of space opens up. Not emptiness in the sense of lacking, but spaciousness in the sense of freedom. We begin to relate to our body, our emotions, our memories, not as things we are, but as things we experience. And that shift changes everything. You still live, love, laugh, make choices, but now from a place of ease, not tension. There's no longer a small, anxious self to defend or protect. Life becomes lighter, because when we break down the illusion of the self, what remains isn't nothingness. What remains is peace. Have you ever wondered why certain thoughts seem to appear out of nowhere, often at the worst possible time? A harsh self-judgment during a peaceful moment, a craving in the middle of a meeting, a memory you thought you had buried rising up without warning. They feel so random, so intrusive. But from the Buddhist perspective, there's nothing random about them at all. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a gentle but profound idea. Every thought is a seed sprouting under the right conditions. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere deep. Your past actions, your habits, your emotional imprints, your environment, your body, even the smallest passing feeling. All these elements work together like soil, sunlight, and water. When the conditions are just right, a seed sprouts, a thought appears. This is the Buddhist principle of karma, kama in Pali, not as reward or punishment, but as cause and effect, action and result. Karma is not fate. It's not fixed. It's a system of momentum. Every action, whether physical, verbal, or mental, leaves an imprint, a tendency, a seed in the mind. These seeds don't disappear. They rest quietly in the background, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Let's take a simple example. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You feel a quick burst of irritation. Maybe you react, maybe you just stew silently. Either way, the anger leaves a mark. The next time something similar happens, your mind already has the conditioning ready. It knows the root. That seed sprouts again, sometimes more quickly, more intensely. That's how patterns form, not because we choose them, but because we unknowingly plant and water the same mental habits over and over. But there's good news here. You can plant new seeds. The mind is fertile ground, and it doesn't discriminate. If you cultivate patience, compassion, and mindfulness, those qualities also take root. Over time, with care and repetition, they begin to grow stronger. You begin to see the results: a softer heart, a calmer mind, a more spacious way of responding to life. The Buddha used the metaphor of farming often. In one story, he explained to a farmer that just as crops grow when the right conditions are met, thoughts arise when inner and outer conditions align. You can't force a crop to grow faster, but you can choose what you plant. You can tend to the soil. You can stop watering the weeds. In practical terms, this means paying attention to the subtle triggers around and within you. Did a restless night of sleep make you more irritable today? Did a passing comment awaken an old insecurity? Did a familiar smell remind you of something you didn't even know you were carrying? When we're unaware of these conditions, our thoughts feel like they control us. We react without understanding why. But when we begin to observe and recognize them, we reclaim a sense of clarity, not control in the forceful sense, but wisdom. We begin to see, this thought is here because this seed was planted. I don't have to follow it. This is one of the most liberating realizations on the path. You are not your conditioning. You may have inherited patterns. You may have repeated them 1,000 times, but they are not permanent. They are not personal. They are not you. And because they are conditioned, they can be changed. This is where practice becomes powerful. Every moment of mindfulness is a moment of planting new seeds. Every time you meet anger with patience, every time you pause before speaking, every time you notice a thought without believing it, you are shifting the landscape of your inner world. Over time, the mind becomes more like a well-tended garden. There are still weeds, but they don't dominate the space. There is more light, more air, more room to breathe. The random storms of thought still come, but now you understand the weather, you recognize the patterns, and more importantly, you know you don't have to chase every cloud across the sky. In this way, karma is not a life sentence. It's a process. It's dynamic, and it responds beautifully to awareness, to effort, to kindness. The thoughts you experience today are not simply your burden, they are your garden. And every breath, every choice, every pause is a chance to plant something new. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not the thoughts inside it, but the space in which those thoughts arise. Imagine that your true nature is not the storm of worries, memories, judgments, or desires, but the sky that holds them all. This is more than a metaphor in Buddhism. It's a direct pointing to the experience of awareness itself. We are so used to identifying with the content of our minds that we forget to notice the container. We believe we are the thought, the mood, the tension. But the Buddha gently invites us to see differently. The thoughts are clouds. They shift, change, and sometimes storm, but the sky remains open, vast, and untouched. That sky is awareness. And it's already here. You don't have to achieve it. You don't have to earn it. You just have to notice it. It's the silent background that has always been with you. When you were joyful, when you were broken, when you were bored, and even now as you read these words. Let's pause right now. Can you notice the space behind your thought? Can you sense that quiet presence that sees without judging? That soft, open knowing that doesn't rush, doesn't cling, doesn't push anything away? This is not something mystical. It's radically natural. So natural that most people overlook it for their entire lives. But once you begin to tune into it, even briefly, you realize there's a place within you that is not disturbed by what arises, a place that doesn't need to fix anything, a place of stillness, peace, and simple knowing. In the Buddhist tradition, this is cultivated through satipatthana, or the practice of mindfulness with clarity. You're not just aware, you're aware that you are aware. It's like shifting your attention from the river to the banks, from the story to the screen it's playing on. And the more you rest in this awareness, the more the mind begins to settle on its own. You're no longer caught in the fight of chasing good thoughts and avoiding bad ones. You're no longer bouncing between craving and aversion. Instead, you are present with what is, just this moment, just this breath, just this awareness. What's extraordinary is that this awareness doesn't reject anything. It doesn't say this thought is bad or this emotion shouldn't be here. It simply sees. And that simple seeing is profoundly healing, because in the space of being seen without judgment, everything begins to relax. The mind loses its compulsive grip. The heart opens. Suffering softens. This is where freedom begins, not in trying to control every thought, not in fixing every wound, but in discovering the space that's never been wounded, the place within you that's never been lost, only overlooked. Neuroscience has begun to notice this too. Research shows that practices which emphasize open, non-judgmental awareness, like mindfulness and loving presence, lead to significant changes in the brain. They reduce activity in the areas associated with self-criticism and overthinking. They increase our capacity for emotional regulation. But beyond the science is something even more profound. The felt sense of coming home. When you begin to live more from awareness than from identification, your entire relationship with life changes. You don't stop having thoughts, you just stop being owned by them. You don't stop feeling emotion, you just stop mistaking it for identity. You realize, I am not the cloud, I am the sky, I am not the wave, I am the ocean, I am not the thought, I am the knowing of it. And in that knowing, you find something you were never really missing, because it was always here, you just forgot to look. There is a quiet strength in not needing to control what arises within you. In the Buddhist tradition, this strength is known as upekkha, equanimity. It's not indifference, and it's certainly not apathy. It is a deep, steady inner balance. The kind of balance that allows you to stay grounded no matter what thoughts or emotions pass through your mind. Whether pleasant or painful, uplifting or overwhelming, you remain open, steady, and undisturbed. Most of us, however, don't live this way. We're taught to chase the pleasant and avoid the unpleasant, to cling to what makes us feel good and reject anything that causes discomfort. This instinct runs deep, and it shows up everywhere, in our conversations, our reactions, even in our meditation. But the truth is, trying to control your thoughts is like trying to control the weather. You might succeed for a moment. You might redirect attention or take a few deep breaths, but sooner or later another thought will appear, uninvited, unpredictable, and out of your control. The practice of equanimity doesn't ask you to stop the storm. It asks you to stop believing you are in the storm. Equanimity arises naturally when we recognize the impermanent, impersonal nature of thoughts. You begin to understand. This thought is here now, but it won't last. This emotion feels intense, but it will pass. You see that all things, pleasant and unpleasant, have a beginning, middle, and end. And because of this, you don't have to push them away or hold them tightly. You can simply let them be. Letting a thought be doesn't mean ignoring it. It means observing it without being caught in it. It means creating a space between stimulus and reaction. It means trusting that you don't have to do something with every mental movement. This is the art of inner spaciousness. And like any art, it takes practice. You can begin with small moments. The next time you feel irritation arise, pause. Name it gently. Irritation is here. Then breathe. Don't feed it. Don't judge it. Don't rush to solve it, just stay with it as it is and watch how it changes. This simple act of noticing without clinging, without rejecting, is the beginning of equanimity. Over time, these moments add up. You start to feel less controlled by your inner world. You become more like a mountain, still, solid, and unmoved, even as storms swirl around your peak. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. In fact, it means you start feeling more fully, because you're not afraid of what arises. You can allow everything its moment without being swept away. The Buddha taught that equanimity is one of the 4 Brahmaviharas, or sublime states of the awakened heart. Alongside loving kindness, compassion, and empathetic joy, equanimity completes the picture. Without it, even our kindness can become clinging. Our compassion can turn into burnout. But with equanimity, we can love freely, act wisely, and rest deeply. Modern science now confirms what the Buddha taught millennia ago. Research into emotional resilience shows that people who cultivate equanimity, not through suppression, but through mindfulness, tend to have greater well-being, better relationships, and a more stable sense of identity. Their nervous systems are more regulated, their decisions are less reactive. They live from a place of presence, not panic. And perhaps most importantly, they suffer less, not because life becomes easier, but because they stop turning pain into extra suffering through resistance. So what does this mean for you practically? It means you don't need to silence the mind to find peace. You just need to change your relationship to it. Instead of trying to escape your thoughts, you learn to sit beside them, like an old friend, no longer afraid of their stories. You listen, you breathe, and you let them pass. And in this practice, something shifts. You realize that peace isn't the absence of thought. Peace is the presence of awareness that doesn't need to react. That's equanimity. That's freedom. And that is the quiet power of letting things be. It's one thing to understand that thoughts are not who we are. It's another thing entirely to bring that understanding into the moments that truly matter, when life gets messy, stressful, or uncertain. But this is where the real transformation happens, when wisdom becomes action, and mindfulness is no longer something we practice, but something we live. The Buddha never asked us to abandon thinking. He didn't suggest that a wise life is one without plans, ideas, or reasoning. Instead, he pointed to a more subtle truth. We can think without being trapped by thought. We can use the mind like a skilled artisan uses a tool, purposefully, gently, and only when needed. This ability is rooted in a quality the Buddha called yoniso manasikara, often translated as wise attention. It's the practice of looking deeply, of paying attention in a way that leads to understanding and inner freedom, not confusion or emotional entanglement. Wise attention is what allows us to navigate the challenges of daily life without falling into habitual reactivity. Let's look at a real-world example. Imagine you're working on a complex problem, maybe a math problem, a creative project, or an emotionally difficult conversation. Your mind begins to spin with possibilities, doubts, ideas, anxieties, hopes. In an untrained mind, these thoughts would form a tangled mess, leading to stress and indecision. But with mindfulness and wise attention, something different unfolds. You begin by setting a clear intention. I want to understand this situation. I want to respond with clarity and care. This simple intention already changes the atmosphere of your inner world. It sets a direction, like a compass gently guiding the ship. Next comes observation. As thoughts arise, you watch them with awareness. You notice frustration when the answer doesn't come easily. You notice old beliefs whispering, "You always mess this up." You don't push them away, but you don't follow them either. You let them be. You return to the task. You stay present. Then comes space. When the mind feels crowded, you pause. You take a breath. Maybe you step away for a few minutes. This isn't avoidance. It's allowing space for new insight to arise. Because sometimes the best answers come not from forcing, but from softening. And finally, you meet it all with equanimity. Whether insight comes quickly or not at all, you stay balanced. You understand that thoughts are processes, not proof of your worth or identity. You are not rushing to escape discomfort. You are learning to stay with it, kindly. In this way, thinking becomes a mindful act, not a compulsive one. Thought becomes a servant of clarity, not the master of your mood. This doesn't mean that all thoughts will now be wise or peaceful, but it means you're no longer blindly swept up by every inner narrative. You're learning to walk through the world with your eyes open, to respond instead of react. And this applies far beyond problem solving. When someone criticizes you, you can pause and observe the sting, rather than immediately defending yourself. When anxiety arises about the future, you can meet it with breath, space, and curiosity. When inspiration arises, you can hold it gently, letting it deepen before rushing into action. This is mindfulness in motion. It's the kind of awareness that doesn't retreat from the world, but engages with it more skillfully, more compassionately. It's the art of bringing your whole self into every interaction, not just your opinions. The Buddha illustrated this beautifully with the parable of the raft. He said that the Dharma, his teachings, are like a raft used to cross a river. Once you've reached the other shore, you don't carry the raft on your back, you set it down. In the same way, even helpful thoughts, strategies, or insights must eventually be released. We use them wisely, then let them go. Because in the end, it's not about holding on to even the best ideas. It's about being free. Free to meet each moment, fresh, without dragging the past behind you or reaching too far into the future. This is wisdom in action. It's not dramatic, it's not mystical. It's found in the quiet decision to pause instead of rush, to breathe instead of react, to speak from understanding rather than habit. And in those small choices, something big begins to change, not just in your mind, but in your entire life. After a long journey across a wide and turbulent river, you finally reach the other shore. You step onto solid ground. The raft that carried you, the thing you held onto so tightly, built so carefully, depended on so completely, has fulfilled its purpose. And now, the Buddha says gently, don't carry the raft on your back. This is the final teaching, not another idea to hold, but the invitation to let go, even of what helped you get here. In the famous Alagadupama Sutta, the Buddha offers this exact metaphor. His teachings, even the most profound insights, are not ends in themselves. They are tools, skillful means, methods to reach freedom. Once freedom is touched, even for a moment, you don't need to keep clinging to the method. You can set it down, not from rejection, but from understanding. And this letting go, this final release, isn't about abandoning the world or giving up all thought. It's about no longer mistaking the raft for the shore, no longer mistaking ideas for truth, no longer mistaking the sense of self for what you truly are, because the real freedom doesn't lie in one more explanation, one more insight, one more system of thought. It lies in what happens when you stop grasping, when you stop chasing, when you stop needing to figure it all out. All along this path, we've asked the question, if I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? And perhaps the most honest answer, the most liberating answer, is silence. Not the silence of confusion or defeat, but the silence of no longer needing an answer. The silence of resting in awareness itself. The silence of being home. The Buddha knew that some questions are not meant to be answered with words. In the Kulamalukya Sutta, when a monk asked him about the nature of the self, whether it is eternal or not, whether it exists after death, the Buddha remained silent. Not out of indifference, but out of deep compassion. He understood that chasing after metaphysical truths while still clinging to the sense of I only leads us further from peace. He wasn't trying to satisfy curiosity. He was trying to free the heart. So instead of offering more conclusions, he gave us something infinitely more valuable: direct experience. Feel the breath. Observe the mind. Notice the arising and passing of sensations. Recognize the impermanence of all things, including the me that tries to hold on. And in doing so, something falls away. The tightness softens. The need to define yourself dissolves. The pressure to control every thought fades. And what's left is stillness, openness, a kind of knowing that doesn't need to speak. This is liberation. Not a destination, not a mystical place, not the end of all thinking, but the end of identification. You still walk, you still work, you still feel joy and pain, but you're no longer inside the storm. You're the sky watching it. And from that place, life becomes simple again. Ordinary moments shimmer with a quiet grace. The mind becomes a friend, not a master. Thoughts become visitors, and the self you've always tried to protect, defend, improve, or understand, it no longer needs to be held up, because it was never the real you to begin with. Letting go doesn't mean losing something. It means remembering who you are without the story. So here we are. Back at the beginning, we asked, if you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them? And maybe now, after all this, the question dissolves, not because we found the perfect answer, but because we no longer need one. So much of life is spent trying to become something smarter, kinder, more successful, more peaceful. And while there's beauty in growth, there's also deep wisdom in simply stopping the chase, stopping the identification, and resting fully, quietly, right where you are. What if you didn't need to be anyone else? What if you didn't need to solve the self, to be free from it? This video was never about giving you answers. It was about walking beside you for a little while, offering reminders, reflections, and space. Space to question what you've always assumed to be true. Space to meet yourself not as a fixed identity, but as a vast, unfolding awareness. If something in this journey resonated with you, if a part of your heart felt seen, softened, or simply stilled, then I invite you to stay connected. This channel, Light of Buddhism, is not just about teachings. It's about transformation. And transformation doesn't happen in one sitting. It happens through presence, patience, and practice. So if you'd like to continue this path with us, please like this video to let us know it touched you. Comment below with your reflections or insights. Even a single word matters. And subscribe so we can keep walking this path together. You are not alone in this inquiry. Many across the world are waking up, not to some new identity, but to the deep stillness that was always here, beneath the noise. Thank you for watching, for listening, and most of all, for being. Until next time, may you walk in peace, breathe with ease, and remember, you are not your thoughts, but the light that sees them